If you look at the running orders for this session, you'll find that Bill's called his talk Finance Matters, and I had a title rather like this to start with, and I sent him an email saying, oh, Bill, in that spirit, could I suggest that I just say, when is open good? And Bill replied, when it's not shut. So I took a leaf from that and moved back to the more prosaic, boring title. But in essence, that's what this is about. And where I want to start is by saying that open systems are rather more than I think many people think they are, even in the context of farm management. They're more than just entities composed of lots of different bits, so they're complex in a trivial sort of complex way, interacting with the environment. We're all familiar with that definition. When John Dillon wrote his 1990 paper on the farm as a purposeful system, he drew initially on the work of Kenneth Boulding, who, following Ludwig von Bertalanff, he proposed that the general systems theory offered access to multidisciplinary insights into what everyone was looking at. But you had to generate a system of systems so that you could make those linkages to the various disciplines that might inform one's analysis of things. John reviewed a variety of frameworks, starting with Boulding's, probably to avoid confusion with particularly the framework that Ackoff and Fred Emery came up with, which he also talked about, where the sort of classic definition of an open system was made. He modified Boulding's framework a tad, which was not the sort of thing that was beyond John. And I'm going to unmodify that to expand a little on open systems, without, however, you'll be glad to hear, going on to a whole diatribe about what open systems are about. Boulding suggested that you have a hierarchy of complexity. When you look at anything in the universe, you have a hierarchy of complexity running from frameworks, which are the bits, the geography and anatomy of the universe and everything smaller, clockworks, which are predetermined simple dynamics, control systems, as Dillon called them, or a thermostat, as Boulding termed them. Still, we're talking closed systems here. We're talking about some process by which the dynamics that are making use of frameworks to generate output are controlling to target a particular level of output, but with some variability in the output through time. And then you move into what Dillon said was called self-maintenance, but which Boulding called open system. And this is a bit more telling than just a move from a closed to an open system. The key here is that you move into life. You move into the situation of the cell and any more complex living entity. You move into self-maintenance and you move into reproduction through a process of input transformation and output interacting with the environment. So there's the ability now, once we get to that level of complexity in the system, to modify what is otherwise the remorseless decay of the system. All systems suffer entropy. We're all buggered. The only question is how fast it will happen, and once one gets to the level of open system, or any of the levels of open system, the propensity arises to be able to modify the rate of decay, but not halt it. The remaining levels of complexity that Boulding talked about are simply increasingly complex open systems. So we have open systems everywhere beyond the fourth level. He said in 1956 we have adequate theoretical models for the first four levels. Beyond that, it's all a bit of a stab. That's changed a bit with DNA research and so on. He is talking about hierarchy. So we need to remember that each higher level embeds all the levels below. So when we're talking about the most primitive open system, a cell, we are talking about frameworks, clockworks and a thermostat in a self-maintaining, reproducing entity called a cell. And this is true whether we're talking about animals, humans, social organisations, which Dillon called human organisations, which is pushing your luck a bit, but that's a point we might come back to with respect to farms, because farms are social organisations quite often. The just humans and farm attached, and transcendental, which we really don't want to get into. But these are all, these do form a hierarchy, and that's important to understand. The potential of open systems to self-maintain, and what we're talking about is something like the social organisation sort of level, the potential of the farm to self-maintain, to slow entropy, depends on the capacity of the system to have profitable exchanges with the environment, where we might define profit in terms of energy. We need a generalised notion of profit. It's not just dollars. The profit that needs to be earned has to be sufficient to reverse the entropic processes that are occurring. So for a cell to survive, or for a farm to survive, we need to have a situation where it has the capacity to modify the way it conducts, the way it looks after the thermostat, in essence, the way it guides the dynamics and the inputs to generate in such a way that it can generate sufficient profit to arrest the inevitable decay that's occurring. That all sounds very lofty and it all sounds very positive. The only trouble is that whilst we're talking about a hierarchy and whilst we're talking about an entity that's pretty close to the top of the hierarchy, everything comes down to just how well the management of the social organisation or human organisation is able to manage the three lowest components of the open system. John Kay, the foundation head of the business school at Oxford University for a while, has described the task for any social organisation in these terms. And we can say that of any organisation. And this is precisely what business marketers also say about organisations, of course. The main game, the only game in the long run, the only thing that will generate survival and profit is just short-term excitement about survival, is to match capabilities to market needs. That is, to be generating output that the environment values to a greater extent than the inputs are going to cost you. What that does is kick into centre stage the quality of foresight. The quality of information specifically that a manager has, the person managing the thermostat has about inputs, production processes and desired output. Foresight is a function of the nature of the environment. Various factors play into that. We've got primary factors such as the variability in input availability and in production processes. We've got technological change, and we've got secondary factors such as the number of competing systems that arise in response to our activities and governance mechanisms that are triggered by competition amongst competing systems. So I've got these bits and pieces floating around in the environment. Some of them are natural, some of them are secondary in as much as they're triggered by our own activity and the activity of local organisations. So regulation or governance of competition, for example, will be one instance. As economists, we're used to inferring a lot from the number of competitors in the environment and the homogeneity of their output. So this business of trying to get a handle on how we might think about the environment and its implications for the way we can manage and the extent to which we can achieve specific goals is not new to us. However, we have had trouble as economists with information quality, particularly in an environment that we might expect to be a bit problematic for making a system survive, that is perfect competition. One of our assumptions is that there's also perfect information, which rather makes the insights shallow that we might get from that. In systems theory, in open systems theory, the inferencing about the environment that organisations have to motor through is derived from relevant uncertainty generated by the primary and secondary impacts of competing systems on the distribution and placidity of threats and opportunities. That is, most of the attention is a very pragmatic management kind of attention, thermostat kind of attention, to the quality of knowledge that we have, the level of relevant uncertainty. This leads to a clear implication which matters considerably for farm management. Atomistic competition of systems creating effectively identical output using biological production systems will likely lead to lower quality foresight than one can contemplate in any other environment we can think of. And I'm not going to go through various frameworks of environments that have been discussed in the systems literature. All we need to recognise is that the near perfectly competitive environment that many farms, but by no means all, are in, is probably the least manageable of environments. So great is the relevant uncertainty that strategy, which throughout today we're really talking about as being poly-period planning, is vacuous. Managing is a quite different game, and this is a theme that I see Bill talking about in what he's about to talk about. The game in this near perfectly competitive environment is one of surviving volatility and financial outcomes that low control leaves. So volatility inevitably drops to the bottom line of farms because the thermostat can't hack it, because so little is known about the frameworks, the inputs and the dynamic systems, the production processes, not to mention the value of output that one might make to be able to adequately improve the chances of survival in the long run. The potential to control system performance improves qualitatively when output differentiation enhances foresight by reducing quite substantially the number of competing systems. That is, for farms to achieve the capacity to aspire to survive deliberately through time, they need to escape what we're saying are these horrendous implications of open systems theory characterisation of operating environments. Or to put it in economic terms, you can't hang around for very long under situations of perfect competition and imperfect knowledge. As a result, and this is mainly the emphasis in the paper, the question arises, well, how do we get out from under this? And any manager in any organisation is always trying to get out from under this. Everybody is trying to escape perfect competition or anything like it. And the question is, well, how does one do that, particularly if you're talking about a farm context, which is about as bad as it gets for managing, particularly in the Australian context. The discipline of farm management, if it's going to be able to talk comprehensively about managing farms for success and for profit and so on, has to be able to deal with this question of when does it make sense to contemplate specific outputs for specific markets, or when is one really in a business of managing something else, making some broad stab as to output that might make sense in the long run, and optimising the way in which you produce it, subject to all the uncertainty that surrounds that. Farm management needs to start further back than it seems to when you consider the way it contemplates what farmers are choosing between. The choice of what to produce needs to be something that farm management advisors are capable of, and I'm suggesting this can't be done until one can get a decent handle on whether a specific farm with specific capabilities has the capacity to jump from perfect to imperfect competition.